To everything, turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And a time to every purpose under heaven. A time to be born, a time to die, a time to plant, a time to reap, a time to kill, a time to heal, a time to laugh, a time to weep. To everything, turn, turn, turn. There is a season, turn, turn, turn. And a time to every purpose under heaven. A time to build up, a time to break down, a time to dance, a time to mourn, a time to cast away stones, a time to gather.
Ashby will be hostess for today's seminar, and to get things started, she will introduce today's speaker. Vicki?
Thank you, Lee. Dr. Marshall Abrams graduated from the University of Pittsburgh. He spent many years working for the National Bureau of Standards and now works for MITRE. He is closely identified with many computer security and computer network security issues. His most widely known work has been as a group member on this trusted network interpretation for the NCSC. This is also known as the Red Book. I'm sure most of you are familiar with it. Dr. Abrams lectures widely on these topics. Last year he spent some time in Australia giving seminars, and he has just returned from giving a paper at a conference in Israel. So with that, let me give you the internationally known Dr. Marshall Abrams.
Well, thank you very much, Vicki, and thank you, Lee, and welcome everybody, those of you here in the studio and those of you out in Wasteland. We're here today to talk about recent developments in network security, and without further ado, I'd like to get into it. I'd like to show you a couple of materials that you may want to take a look at afterwards. We have here a book, a recent book in the computer security area, Building a Secure Computer System by Maury Gasser. It's published by Van Asteren Reinhold, and it's just an excellent textbook in the area of computer security. We'll be going beyond the scope of this book today to talk about networks. And the second item I want to show you is something you may want to take a look at afterwards, is a collection of tutorial reprints in the area of computer and network security. And this has been edited by myself and Harold Podell. It's a collection of what we think are some of the best papers in the field. It will tell you why a paper is important, summarize it, and then give you the paper itself to read. This is exceptionally useful for self-study, or sometimes we would use it in a graduate course. So, without any further comments, let's just get into the introduction and start talking about information system security. One of the questions that I don't think we need to spend a lot of time on is why information security is important. If you didn't know that, you wouldn't be here today. We know that computers have become an important part, probably a standard part, of most operations. Business is inseparably entwined with the computer. When the computer is not available, the organization comes to a screeching halt. This must mean that the information that's stored in that computer is important. Now, important is fine, but how about valuable? How can we put a value on the information? Can we put a dollar value on it? We'd like to. We'd like to do that because we want to know how much we're going to have to spend to protect it. The amount of money that we spend to protect an asset should not exceed the value of that asset. One way of assessing it is the cost of gathering that information. Another one would be the cost to the organization if the information is not available. How much money does United Airlines lose if their automated reservation system goes off the air? How much did various organizations lose this week when the computer virus hit? I saw in the paper that one university estimated it cost them $100,000 just to repair the damage that had been done by that particular virus. Now, some information is perishable, has a very short lifetime, in which case we're not very worried about protecting that information. Which leads me into the question of what are our security objectives. It might be secrecy or non-disclosure. It might be integrity. It might be availability of service. We need to have security objectives in our organization. We basically have to establish a policy before we get started. We have to know what the security posture of the organization is going to be, what value it places on each of these objectives. Different organizations will have different objectives. The Defense Department has primarily concentrated on secrecy or non-disclosure. That's been their major objective. The virus attacks are usually concerned with the other two areas, with integrity and with availability of service. At the moment, those are not objectives inside the Defense Department policy, although there are a lot of people who think they should be. The purpose of information system security is to protect information against unauthorized modification, unauthorized destruction, unauthorized disclosure. The key word here is unauthorized. You want people to be able to do what they're supposed to do. We want to make life easy for the good guys. And we don't want the bad guys. We don't want the adversary or the enemy or the nasties or the hacker or whatever your dirty word is. We don't want the bad guys in there doing something to our information. We're concerned with maintaining the integrity and availability both of the computing system, the hardware, and the applications, the software, and the data. We also have problems in terms of protecting it from theft. We don't want our personal computer to walk away. And then finally, we're concerned with issues of privacy. Now, privacy, as you probably all realize, is not a constitutional right. I think probably because there weren't any threats to privacy at the time that the Constitution was formed. It is a right, however, that exists in law, and it's a right to some control over information about yourself as an individual.
I'm Stuart Katsky. I first met Marshall in 1975 when I began working at the National Bureau of Standards, known today as the National Institute of Standards and Technology. While we overlapped at NBS for about 6 years, we did not actually work together until many years later, since we were in different computer areas at NBS. As most of you know, in the early 80s, Marshall left NBS to join MITRE. Over the years, we had many opportunities to meet, chat, eat, and enjoy each other's company at events such as the NIST NSA National Computer Security Conference, ACSAC, and many others. We also had the opportunity to interact professionally when Marshall was working on the air traffic control systems of the FAA. These interactions occurred for two particularly important reasons. The first was in conjunction with Marshall's attempts to apply NIST's computer security standards to the air traffic control systems. The second was a result of Marshall's providing detailed, insightful, professional comments on numerous drafts of NIST's computer security standards. Toward the end of our careers, Marshall and I finally got to work together on some really fun projects, such as developing the FISMA suite of cybersecurity standards and the cybersecurity protection of our nation's critical infrastructure. I have it on good authority that a major determining factor for Marshall's deciding to retire was the end of his work he was doing for NIST, the work that he was enjoying so much. During those later years, my wife Viv and I also established strong social bonds between Rochelle and Marshall that included attending many folk music concerts and live theater performances, going on a cruise to South America, and of course, having many fine meals together. I will miss Marshall dearly, particularly the intellectual conversations we always had, the amazing insights he provided, his distinctive voice and laugh, his warm, welcoming personality, his willingness to help, and most of all, his friendship. I will always cherish the memories I have of him that remind me of the fun times we had together.
Hi, I'm Joe Vioni, a former friend and colleague of Marshall Abrams. We both started at the MITRE Corporation in the spring of '82. He came in with these credentials that made all the other staff buzz and all that before he arrived. And he came in, I got to know him, we bonded almost immediately. We discovered we both liked to do research and we both liked to go to lunch and and we both liked ice cream. That was a big bonding moment right there. Anyways, he did so much work at MITRE. I don't know where to begin. He pioneered the use of personal computers. Remember, this is early 80s, and integrating them into the corporate infrastructure. And he looked at the security of air traffic control systems. We supported the FAA to see how they could be improved, and wrote some of the initial requirements for those systems for cybersecurity. Furthering the state-of-the-art of the common criteria in the government. He did complete assessments of organizations of their state of security. So he worked on big things. He was a big picture guy. He could, see the forest rather than each individual tree, and he was just very good at that. But I also looked at how Marshall approached his work, and he did it in a way that not only put things down on paper and gave them to tough critics to look at. He also put it down in a way that other people could learn. He'd make presentations. He always said, if you don't write it down and you don't put it in front of folks, it's like it doesn't exist. So you got to do that. The other thing I learned is how he placed a very high importance on people. The sponsors, the colleagues he worked with. He really wanted to get to know them, what their expectations were, how they could contribute, what made them tick as either engineers or customers of the work. And that was one of the things that I think separated him from other engineers. One last little thing about Marshall that happened way deep in our relationship of working and socializing. We were talking about Boy Scouts, and he seemed to get kind of interested and excited. And I thought, oh, that's strange, because my son was in Boy Scouts at the time. And I said, Marshall, you're interested in that? He said, yeah, I was in Scouts. I said, didn't know that. I said, tell me more. He said, well, I was in Scouts, and I became an Eagle Scout, which is very hard and many years in the making to do. I said, Marshall, I'm a bit surprised that you were an Eagle Scout. He said, well, I got into the Scouts. It was the highest goal to achieve in our troop. And he said, and you know me, if there's a high goal to achieve, I go after it. And that's Marshall.
Good afternoon. My name is Charlie Payne. Marshall had a vision for our community that we should focus on solving hard problems that require the combined effort of government, industry, and academia to address. In the very first meeting of what would become the ACSAC conference, they focused on computer security for space systems, in particular, how to handle classified information safely on those systems. Later, as the field became more diverse and the problems much more broad, Marshall continued to insist on practical solutions. And later, he founded the National Interest Track, which would bring in government and industry researchers to talk about these problems. We continue Marshall's vision today in our hard topic theme, and this is what makes ACSAC unique among all the computer security conferences that are out there today. Marshall's vision for taking hard problems and finding practical solutions.
I first met Marshall Abrams in the late 1980s when ACSAC was new, maybe 4 or 5 years old, and I came as a junior researcher, showing off my new research in secure graphical user interfaces. I met Marshall then. Marshall was encouraging. He had a vision for ACSAC to be different from all the other security conferences, of which there were not many at that time. There was primarily the Oakland conference and what was called the Baltimore conference at the time. Over the intervening 30 years, I've had the opportunity to work with Marshall extensively in organizing ACSAC and other events. In the early days of ACSAC, we would meet together as an organizing committee once a month in person in a restaurant. And after a discussion of the business of organizing the conference, we would have a lovely dinner and socialize and get to know each other. At the end of every conference, we would always have a dinner at a restaurant or frequently at somebody's house to celebrate the successful organization of the conference. Marshall always viewed himself as a curmudgeon, but a friendly curmudgeon. He was always encouraging to junior faculty, to graduate students, to people from industry. He always saw that the mission of the organization and the conference should be more than just speaking to the traditional researchers. Marshall was also supportive when we moved to add things like the New Security Paradigms Workshop and the Swiss Scholarship Program, recognizing that we needed to be more than just ACSAC. Marshall was a curmudgeon, but Marshall was also a friend. I'll miss him. He was my friend, and I hope you'll join me in thinking of him. Thank you.
I first met Marshall in 1988 when Dr. Dixie Baker recruited me to be her assistant at the 5th ACSAC in Tucson. She thought I would be able to work well with Marshall and his unique personality. Since then, I have worked closely with Marshall on every ACSAC, as well as working with Marshall as a member and later secretary of ACSA. We have fought over bylaws and privacy policies, started new initiatives, established new policies and programs. Marshall had a dedication to this conference and the computer security community that was unmatched. Marshall and I also worked together in areas like the federal criteria and the development of the NIST security controls. But my best memories of Marshall are the little things. His beaming with joy when the conference was in New Orleans and sharing the conference dinner with his daughter. Our shared love of trains and taking him out to the Orange Empire Railway Museum when the conference was in Anaheim. Getting up early to set out projectors for the conferences and staying late to collect them after all the sessions ended. The virtual conference you have this year is due to his efforts in retirement to select the best video service when the decision was made to go virtual. He did detailed analysis on figuring out the right ones. I will miss Marshall and will miss working with him on the conference and with ACSA, and will strive to continue his good work.
I first met Marshall in the early 1990s when we were both involved in the National Computer Security Conference, or NCSC, but I didn't really get to know him well until I attended my very first ACSAC in 2012. Over the following years, I got to work very closely with Marshall, first in my role as the ACSAC Student Conferenceships Chair, and then as the Conference Chair. Marshall was proudly known as the ACSAC curmudgeon. For those who aren't aware, Merriam-Webster defines a curmudgeon as a crusty, ill-tempered, and usually old man. But with Marshall, this couldn't be further from the truth. I always found Marshall to be a very caring, helpful, and passionate person, especially when it came to ACSAC. And he wasn't old, he was just very well seasoned, having been involved with ACSAC since he started it many years earlier in 1985. Moving forward, I will be taking over Marshall's role as the ACSAC treasurer, and while I will miss him dearly, I'm very proud to be continuing in his footsteps.